Just as the wedding bells were about to ring, an 8-year-old girl's tiny voice shatters the silence. Wait, don't marry her. What could make a little girl stop her own father's wedding? The truth she uncovered is darker than anyone could imagine. A sinister plan, a hidden lover, and a secret that could destroy everything. How far will she go to protect her dad? And what happens when the bride's real intentions are exposed? Stay tuned, because this story takes twists you won't see coming. The sun shone brightly through the large windows of the elegant chapel, casting colorful patterns from the stained glass onto the floor. It was a perfect day for a wedding. Clear skies, warm breeze, and the scent of blooming flowers filling the air. Everything seemed to be just right, almost as if the universe itself was celebrating the union of two souls. The guests chatted excitedly, filling the room with a joyful hum. Laughter and whispers of anticipation echoed, mixing with the soft notes of a string quartet playing near the altar. At the center of this celebration stood a little girl named Mia, 8 years old, with a head full of curly brown hair and bright green eyes that seemed to catch every detail. Today, Mia was dressed in a beautiful white dress, a smaller version of the one her soon-to-be stepmother, Isabella, would be wearing. Mia clutched a small satin pillow in her hands, carefully balancing the wedding rings tied with a delicate ribbon. She was the flower girl, the ring bearer, and, most importantly, the beloved daughter of the groom, Nathan. Nathan Reynolds, a well-respected architect, known for his kindness and calm demeanor, stood at the altar, looking every bit the proud father. His smile was wide and genuine, his suit tailored perfectly to fit his tall, athletic frame. He looked happier than Mia had seen him in years, since before her mother had passed away. That smile, the way he beamed at his guests, filled Mia's heart with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. But despite the beauty of the moment, Mia couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. Isabella, the bride-to-be, was stunning as she stood just outside the chapel doors, ready to make her grand entrance. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in an elegant braid, adorned with tiny white flowers that matched her lace gown. She looked every bit the picture-perfect bride, and everyone around seemed enchanted by her charm. But Maya knew something the others didn't, something she had kept hidden, even from her father. Isabella was not who she pretended to be. Mia's small fingers clenched tightly around the pillow, feeling the silk fabric bunch up under her grip. The memory of a conversation she had overheard just days before played on a loop in her mind, making her feel sick with worry. It was a late night, and Mia had gotten up for a glass of water when she heard Isabella talking on the phone in the living room. The bride's voice, usually soft and sweet, had taken on a sharp, almost venomous edge. "Mark, I told you to stay out of sight until after the wedding," Isabella had hissed into the phone. "Everything needs to go perfectly, or the whole plan falls apart. Once I'm married, we'll have access to Nathan's accounts, and then we disappear. Do you understand? No mistakes." Muya had pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Isabella would hear it. She didn't understand all the details, but she knew enough. Isabella was using her father. This wedding wasn't about love. It was about money, and something far more sinister than Mia could fully comprehend. The officiant's voice pulled Mia back to the present. He was welcoming the guests, his deep, resonant tones filling the chapel. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this beautiful day to celebrate the union of Nathan Reynolds and Isabella Monroe." Mia's eyes darted over to her father, who stood tall and proud, his gaze fixed on the doors, where Isabella would soon appear. He looked so happy. blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of this perfect day. Mia wanted to run to him, to tell him everything she had overheard, but fear held her back. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was just a scared little girl who didn't want a new stepmother? And even worse, what if Isabella found out that Mia knew her secret? The soft strains of the wedding march began to play, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. The doors swung open slowly, revealing Isabella in her magnificent gown. The guests let out a collective sigh of admiration, whispering to each other about how beautiful she looked. But Mia couldn't tear her gaze away from the bride's face. She wasn't looking at the crowd, or even at Nathan. Her eyes were searching, scanning the room, until they landed on Mia. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Mia saw it again. That cold, calculating look she had caught glimpses of before. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Doesn't she look beautiful, Mia?" whispered Aunt Carol, one of Nathan's closest friends, who was seated in the front row. Mia forced a smile and nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Yes, she does," she managed to say, though her voice sounded small and far away, even to her own ears. Isabella glided down the aisle, her steps graceful and measured. She looked like a princess from one of Mia's storybooks. But Mia knew better now. The princess wasn't here to find her happily ever after. She was here to steal it. As Isabella reached the altar and took Nathan's hand, the officiant continued with the ceremony. "We are gathered here today to witness the joining of Nathan and Isabella in matrimony," he began. But Mia couldn't focus on his words. Her heartbeat drowned out everything else, thudding loudly in her ears as she tried to figure out what to do. Isabella's smile was wide and serene as she looked up at Nathan, squeezing his hand affectionately. To anyone else, it would look like pure love. But Mia could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers dug just a bit too hard into Nathan's arm. It was a small, almost imperceptible sign, but to Mia, it spoke volumes. Nathan turned and smiled down at his daughter, giving her a little wink, as if to say, "Everything's going to be all right." He had no idea that his perfect day was teetering on the edge of a cliff, about to plunge into darkness. Mia's hands shook as she held the pillow with the rings. She looked at the delicate circles of gold, tied with white ribbon, symbols of a love she now knew was a lie. The officiant's voice droned on, but Mia couldn't make out the words. All she could think about was the phone call, the insurance policy, and the fear that her father was walking straight into a trap. As the officiant reached the part of the ceremony where he asked if anyone had objections, a silence fell over the room, heavy and expectant. Mia's heart raced. "This is it," she thought. "This is my last chance." Her gaze flicked back to Isabella, who was staring straight ahead, her smile frozen in place. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that looked like fear. Mia took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her now, sensing her unease. The officiant's voice seemed to echo in her head. "Speak now, or forever hold your peace." Time seemed to slow down. Mia's legs felt like they were made of lead, her voice trapped in her throat. She squeezed the pillow so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her lips parting as she tried to speak. This was the moment. She had to do it. She had to save her father before it was too late. "Wait." Mia's voice rang out, small but clear in the silence of the chapel. A collective gasp filled the room, and all heads turned to look at her. Mia stood trembling, her eyes wide with fear. But she didn't back down. She looked up at her father, tears welling in her eyes. "Daddy, please don't marry her," she whispered. "She's lying to you." The silence that followed was deafening. broken only by the sound of Isabella's sharp intake of breath. Nathan's face paled, a look of shock and confusion clouding his features as he turned from his daughter to his fiancée. "Mia," he began, his voice shaky, "what are you talking about?" Mia took a step forward, her whole body trembling, but she met Isabella's cold, furious gaze head-on. "I heard her, Daddy," she said, her voice breaking. "She's planning something terrible. She's not who you think she is." And with those words, the perfect day shattered like glass. The gasp that filled the chapel lingered in the air, like a sharp intake of breath that never fully exhaled. It was a collective sound, one of shock, disbelief, and something else, something deeper that Mia couldn't quite place. The elegant space, once brimming with joy and celebration, now felt suffocating. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in place, feeling the eyes of every guest boring into her. For a brief, terrifying moment, she wanted to shrink away, to take back the words she had just spoken. But the fear in her father's eyes pushed her forward. Nathan turned to Mia, his face a mask of confusion, hurt, and an undercurrent of something darker, doubt. He dropped Isabella's hand, stepping closer to his daughter, his voice hushed but urgent. "Mia, sweetheart, what are you talking about?" His eyes were pleading with her, begging for an explanation that made sense. Mia's small hands trembled, still gripping the satin pillow with the wedding rings, as if it were a lifeline. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice choked with tears she fought to hold back. "I heard her. I heard Isabella talking on the phone. She's planning something bad. She's using you." The chapel, filled with friends and family who had come to celebrate love, was now shrouded in a thick cloud of uncertainty. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd, guests leaning in close, exchanging looks of concern and disbelief. Isabella's smile faltered for the first time, the serene expression cracking as if it were a porcelain mask. She stepped forward, her face twisting into an expression of wounded innocence. "Nathan," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm, though he instinctively pulled back. "You can't seriously believe this, can you? She's just a child, Nathan. She's confused." Mia's gaze locked onto Isabella's. For the first time, Mia saw the real Isabella, the woman behind the mask. Her blue eyes, once warm and welcoming, now held a steely, calculating edge. The expression sent a shiver down Mia's spine. This wasn't just a case of a woman not liking her new stepdaughter. This was something far more dangerous. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to make sense of the chaos unfolding before him. He turned back to Mia, his voice softer now, laced with desperation. "Mia, I need you to be honest with me. Did you misunderstand something? Are you scared because this is all happening so fast?" Mia shook her head vigorously, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Daddy. I know what I heard. She was talking to someone named Mark about your money, about an insurance policy. She said they'd disappear after the wedding." The crowd erupted into a low murmur, the guests visibly agitated now. Aunt Carol stood up, her face pale, as she clutched her purse to her chest. "Nathan, maybe we should take a moment," she suggested. This doesn't seem like something a child would make up." Isabella's face darkened, a flash of anger crossing her features before she quickly smoothed it over. She forced a brittle laugh, stepping away from Nathan. "This is absurd," she spat out, her voice rising in pitch. "You all know me. I've been nothing but kind and loving to Mia. She's making this up because she's afraid of losing her father's attention. Isn't that right, Mia?" Her eyes narrowed, daring the little girl to argue. Mia clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. "You're lying," she shouted, her voice echoing through the chapel. "You're the one who's pretending. I heard everything. You told Mark not to make any mistakes. You said it was your last chance." Nathan's face drained of color as he staggered back, as if the words had struck him like a physical blow. He looked at Isabella, his expression a mixture of shock and horror. "Isabella," he said slowly, his voice trembling, "please tell me this isn't true. Tell me that what Mia is saying isn't real." For a moment, the room went still. It felt as if time itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for Isabella's response. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that might save her from the trap closing in. And then, in an instant, her demeanor changed. The sweet, loving bride vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating woman who seemed like a stranger. "Fine," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Believe what you want. But if you think I'm going to stand here and be humiliated by a spoiled little brat and her gullible father, you're mistaken." Gasps filled the room as the guests recoiled, shocked by the sudden transformation. Nathan's face contorted with pain. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How could you?" Isabella took a step back, her eyes narrowing as she calculated her next move. She glanced toward the exit, clearly weighing her options. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she spat. "You're all so easy to fool, so desperate for a fairy tale ending. Well, guess what, Nathan? There's no happily ever after here." Mia watched, her heart pounding, as Isabella turned on her heel and began to march down the aisle, her white dress billowing like a storm cloud behind her. The room exploded into chaos. Guests jumped up from their seats, shouting questions, demanding answers. Mia stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. She had done it. She had stopped the wedding. But what now? Nathan dropped to his knees in front of Mia, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he choked out. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was happening." Mia buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing with a mix of relief and sadness. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I just didn't want you to get hurt." A loud crash echoed from the back of the chapel, drawing everyone's attention. Isabella had knocked over a table, in her rush to leave, scattering flower arrangements and decorations across the floor. She glanced back one last time, her face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Mia. "You have no idea what you've done." With that, she pushed through the double doors and disappeared into the bright afternoon light. The guests, stunned into silence, slowly turned back to look at Nathan and Mia, their faces a mixture of sympathy and shock. Aunt Carol stepped forward, her hand over her mouth. "Nathan," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "What? What just happened?" Nathan rose to his feet, holding Mia close, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and rage. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I'm going to find out." As the guests began to file out of the chapel, whispering among themselves, Nathan and Mia remained at the altar, holding each other tightly. The perfect day they had imagined was gone, shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. But in the midst of the wreckage, there was one bright spot. They had each other. Mia looked up at her father, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "are we going to be okay?" Nathan kissed the top of her head, his eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, sweetheart," he promised, his voice firm. "We're going to be okay. We'll figure this out together." In the distance, the sound of police sirens grew louder, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the chapel. The officers were already on their way, alerted by a concerned guest. Nathan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the storm that was about to come. He looked down at Mia, feeling an overwhelming wave of love and gratitude for his brave little girl. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You saved us both." Maya managed a small, brave smile, even as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. "I just did what Mom would have done," she said quietly. "I protected you." And in that moment, as the sirens drew closer and the guests murmured their confusion, Nathan realized something important. No matter what came next, they would face it together. Because the bond between father and daughter was stronger than any deception, any betrayal. It was unbreakable. The police arrived at the chapel within minutes, their flashing blue and red lights casting an eerie glow across the white stone walls. The sound of the sirens, once distant, now filled the air with a sense of urgency. Maya stood close to her father, her small hand gripping his tightly, as they watched the officers step out of their cars and begin questioning the guests who lingered outside, buzzing with shock and confusion. Nathan knelt down, his face level with Mia's, and brushed a stray curl away from her damp cheek. "Mia," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to tell the police what you heard, okay? I know it's scary, but it's really important." Mia swallowed hard, nodding, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. "I will, Daddy," she whispered. "I promise." Nathan kissed her forehead, pulling her into a quick, tight hug before standing up. He took a deep breath and approached Officer Daniels, a tall woman with a stern face but kind eyes. She seemed to soften as she looked down at Mia, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Sir, I understand there's been an incident," Officer Daniels said, her tone professional yet gentle. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Nathan's face was pale, his jaw clenched as he nodded. It's complicated," he stammered. "My daughter, Mia. She overheard a conversation between Isabella and someone named Mark. It sounded like they were planning something dangerous, something involving money and possibly an insurance policy." Officer Daniels' expression shifted, a flicker of concern passing across her face. "An insurance policy? That's serious, Mr. Reynolds." She glanced down at Mia, who was clinging to her father's side. "And you're saying your daughter overheard this?" Mia stepped forward, her voice small but steady. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I heard Isabella talking late at night. She was angry and told Mark not to make any mistakes. She said once they got married, they'd take my dad's money and disappear." A silence fell between them as Officer Daniels processed Mia's words. She crouched down, bringing herself to Mia's level, her gaze softening. "You're very brave for telling us this," she said gently. "I know it wasn't easy." Mia nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just didn't want my dad to get hurt." Officer Daniels gave her a reassuring smile before standing up and turning back to Nathan. "We need to look into this immediately," she said, her voice firm. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have any idea where Isabella might have gone?" Nathan shook his head, his expression one of utter bewilderment. "No," he admitted. "I thought I knew her, but now I don't even know who she really is." As they spoke, another officer approached, holding a small leather bag in his gloved hands. "We found this in the bridal suite," he reported. "It appears to belong to the bride." Nathan's heart sank as he recognized the bag. It was the one Isabella always carried with her, sleek and black, with a gold clasp. He had seen her take it with her everywhere, often clutching it close, as if it held something precious. Now, it felt like a Pandora's box, filled with secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. "Open it," Officer Daniels instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. The officer carefully unzipped the bag and pulled out a stack of papers, several credit cards, and a small, sleek laptop. But it was the document on top that made Nathan's blood run cold. It was an insurance policy, just as Mia had said, with his name printed in bold letters at the top. He snatched the document from the officer's hands, scanning it quickly. His eyes widened as he read the details. A life insurance policy worth $5 million, listing Isabella Monroe as the sole beneficiary. The date of the policy? Just 2 weeks after they had gotten engaged. This can't be real," Nathan breathed, his hands trembling. "She said it was for our future, for Mia's education and security. She lied." Mia tugged at his sleeve, her green eyes filled with worry. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you okay?" Nathan dropped to his knees in front of her, pulling her into his arms. He held her tight, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. "I'm so sorry, Mia," he choked out. "I should have believed you. I should have seen the signs." "It's not your fault," Mia said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "She tricked us both." Officer Daniels cleared her throat, giving them a moment before speaking. "Mr. Reynolds," she said gently, "I think it would be best if you and Maya came down to the station. We need to take your statements and gather all the evidence. We're also issuing a warrant for Isabella's arrest." Nathan nodded numbly, feeling as though he were moving through a dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He stood, taking Mia's hand, and followed the officers out of the chapel, leaving behind the shattered remains of what should have been the happiest day of his life. At the police station, pieces of the puzzle. The fluorescent lights of the police station were harsh and unwelcoming, casting a sterile, clinical glow over everything. Nathan and Mia sat side by side in a small interview room, the chill of the air conditioning seeping into their bones. Maya clutched her father's hand, her small fingers entwined with his, seeking comfort in his presence. Detective Harper entered the room, a man in his 50s with a kind but weary face, as if he had seen too much of the world's darkness. He gave them a brief smile before taking a seat across the table, setting a thick folder down with a heavy thud. "Mr. Reynolds." "Mia," he began, his voice gentle but serious, "I need you both to tell me everything you know about Isabella Monroe. Start from the beginning." Nathan exchanged a glance with Mia, then took a deep breath and began to speak. He told the detective about how he had met Isabella, how quickly they had fallen in love, and how she had seemed like the perfect woman, caring, attentive, and wonderful with Mia. As he spoke, he could feel the sting of betrayal anew, each memory tainted now by the knowledge of her deception. Mia jumped in when her father faltered, her voice small but steady. She recounted the night she had overheard Isabella's phone call, the cold look on her face when she thought no one was watching, and the whispered threats when Nathan wasn't around. Detective Harper listened intently, his pen scratching across a notepad as he took notes. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "This is serious," he said quietly. "We've seen cases like this before. Con artists who prey on wealthy individuals, manipulating them into dangerous situations for financial gain. But Isabella's plan was particularly ruthless." Nathan felt a wave of nausea roll through him. "How could I not have seen it?" he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "How could I have let her into our lives?" Mia squeezed his hand, looking up at him with a fierce, determined gaze. "Daddy, it's not your fault. She tricked everyone. But we stopped her. Together." Detective Harper nodded, offering them a reassuring smile. "You're right, Mia," he agreed. "Your bravery might have saved your father's life. Now we just need to find Isabella before she can disappear." He stood, collecting his notes and the stack of the evidence the officers had brought in from the chapel. "We'll issue an APB and notify airports and bus stations. She won't get far." As the detective left the room, Nathan pulled Mia into his lap, holding her close. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, tears stinging his eyes. "You're the bravest little girl I've ever known," he murmured. "I don't know what I would do without you." Mia nestled into his embrace, her eyes fluttering closed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax, knowing that she had done the right thing, even if it had turned their world upside down. The storm wasn't over yet, but they were facing it together. And together, they were stronger than anything Isabella could throw their way. The tension from the police station carried over into the following days, wrapping around Nathan and Mia like an invisible shroud. Nathan had taken time off from work, choosing to focus entirely on his daughter and the mess they now found themselves in. The once warm and vibrant energy in their home had been replaced by an uneasy silence, punctuated only by whispered conversations and hurried phone calls with the police. For Mia, the world felt different now. Everything she knew had been shaken: her trust in people, her sense of safety, and the love she thought she understood. She couldn't escape the memory of Isabella's cold eyes and the harsh, clipped tone of her voice on that phone call. It replayed in her mind, echoing like a warning she wished she could forget. Nathan tried his best to comfort Mia, but he was struggling too. He'd fallen deeply for Isabella, and the betrayal felt like a physical blow. He often found himself staring blankly at the walls, replaying their time together, searching for any signs he might have missed. But his mind always circled back to the same haunting question: how could he have been so blind? The unexpected phone call. It was late in the evening, and the sky outside was painted with hues of deep purple and indigo. Nathan was in the kitchen, aimlessly washing dishes he had already cleaned twice, just to keep his hands busy. Mia sat at the dining table, her schoolwork spread out before her, though she wasn't making much progress. Her pencil moved sluggishly across the page, the numbers and words blurring together as her thoughts drifted back to the wedding day. Suddenly the phone rang. The sound shattered the quiet, making them both jump. Nathan wiped his hands on a dish towel and answered the call without checking the caller ID, half expecting it to be another follow-up from the detective. "Hello?" Nathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a soft, familiar voice that sent chills down his spine. "Nathan, it's me, Isabella." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He felt his entire body tense up, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles turned white. "Isabella," he managed to choke out. "Where are you? What do you want?" Mia looked up sharply, her eyes wide with alarm. She couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see the fear etched across her father's face, and she knew. "I need to explain," Isabella continued, her voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "Please, Nathan, just listen to me. You have to believe that I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to go this far." Nathan's mind raced, a mix of anger, confusion, and a painful flicker of the love he once felt for her. "You lied to me," he said, his voice shaking. "You used me, and you scared my daughter. How can you possibly justify that?" "I didn't have a choice," Isabella insisted, her tone growing desperate. "Mark, he's dangerous. He's the one who planned everything. I wanted out, but he wouldn't let me. He threatened me, Nathan. Please, I need your help." Nathan felt a surge of fury, hotter than anything he'd felt before. "You expect me to believe that? After everything you've done?" There was silence on the other end, broken only by a quiet, choked sob. "You have to," Isabella whispered. "For your sake. For Mia's. Meet me at the old pier tonight. I'll explain everything, I promise. But come alone. If you bring the police, I'll disappear, and you'll never know the truth." Before Nathan could respond, the line went dead. He lowered the phone slowly, staring at it as if it might give him answers. Mia watched him with wide, fearful eyes. "Was that her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, sweetie," he said. "It was Isabella." "What did she want?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. Nathan hesitated. He knew he should call the police, tell them everything. But a small part of him, a foolish, stubborn part, needed to hear what Isabella had to say. "She wants to meet tonight," he said finally. "She says she can explain everything." "No." Mia's voice was sharp, panicked. "Daddy, it's a trap. She's lying, just like before. Please don't go." Nathan knelt down in front of his daughter, taking her hands in his. "I know it sounds dangerous," he said gently, "but if there's even a chance she's telling the truth, I need to find out. I need to know what we're dealing with." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. "What if she hurts you?" she whispered. Nathan pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "I'll be careful," he promised, "but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Mia sniffled, wiping her eyes. "I trust you, Daddy," she said softly. "But please, don't go alone." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back soon," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. A dangerous meeting. The old pier was a relic of the past, a place once bustling with fishermen and families, but now abandoned and forgotten. The wood creaked under Nathan's footsteps as he made his way toward the end, the cool night air biting at his skin. He scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of Isabella. He found her standing by the edge, silhouetted against the moonlit water. She turned as he approached, her face half hidden in shadow. For a moment, he could almost see the woman he had fallen in love with. The warmth in her smile, the softness in her eyes. But then the memory of her lies, her cold manipulation, crashed back into him like a wave, and he steeled himself. "You came," Isabella said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves lapping against the pier. "Tell me the truth," Nathan demanded. "No more lies, no more manipulation. What's really going on?" Isabella sighed, rubbing her arms as if she were cold. "Mark and I, we've done this before," she admitted. "We find wealthy men, charm them, and then take what we can. It was never supposed to go this far, Nathan. But when I met you, She paused, her voice cracking. "I started to feel something real. That's why I wanted out. But Mark, he wouldn't let me leave. He said if I tried to back out, he'd come after you and Mia." Nathan felt a flicker of doubt, quickly smothered by his anger. "And I'm supposed to believe that you're the victim here?" he spat. "You made your choices, Isabella. And now you want me to save you from the consequences?" "Please," Isabella begged, her voice raw with desperation. "You don't know what he's capable of. If you don't help me, he'll come after you next. He's probably watching us right now." The hairs on the back of Nathan's neck stood up, a prickle of fear running down his spine. He glanced around, scanning the darkness for any movement. "Is this another one of your tricks?" he demanded. "Are you trying to set me up again?" But before Isabella could answer, there was a loud crack, like the sound of a gunshot. Nathan ducked instinctively, throwing himself to the ground. Isabella screamed, clutching her side, as she crumpled to the pier, blood seeping through her fingers. Nathan crawled over to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Isabella," he shouted, pressing his hands against the wound. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, filled with pain. "Mark," she gasped. "He found us." Nathan's mind raced, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he couldn't leave her. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and dialed 911, his voice frantic as he gave their location. "Help is on the way," he told Isabella, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Her eyes were glazing over, her breaths shallow and ragged. "Nathan," she whispered, her hand weakly gripping his. "I'm sorry." He squeezed her hand, feeling a strange mix of pity and fury. "You should have told the truth sooner," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Maybe we could have fixed this." But it was too late. Isabella's hand went limp in his, her head slumping to the side as her eyes stared blankly at the sky. Nathan felt a wave of numbness wash over him. He had wanted answers, but all he was left with were more questions, and the chilling realization that Mark was still out there, watching, waiting. He heard the sirens in the distance, drawing closer, but he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new nightmare. The ambulance lights bathed the old pier in harsh, flashing red and blue. It was a chaotic scene. Paramedics rushed to tend to Isabella's lifeless body, while police officers cordoned off the area, setting up a perimeter. The cool night air was filled with a mixture of frantic shouts and the crackle of police radios. Nathan sat on the ground, his back against a post, staring numbly at the dark water. The events of the past hour replayed in his mind, a jumbled, nightmarish blur he couldn't make sense of. Detective Carter approached, his expression a mix of concern and grim determination. He knelt beside Nathan, his voice lowered. "Nathan, can you tell me what happened here? We need to understand everything." Nathan looked up, his face pale and streaked with tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. He took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "She called me," he said quietly. "Isabella. She wanted to meet. She said she had something important to tell me, something I needed to know about Mark." Detective Carter nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And did she say why? Why she wanted you to come alone?" Nathan swallowed hard, his gaze drifting back to Isabella's motionless body, now covered with a white sheet. "She said she was in danger," he whispered. "She said Mark was behind everything, that he was forcing her to go along with the plan." Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you believed her?" Nathan hesitated, his emotions swirling. He didn't know what to believe anymore. He had loved Isabella, trusted her completely. But the layers of lies and manipulation she had spun around him made it impossible to separate the truth from the deceit. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wanted to believe her, but—" Carter placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You did what you thought was right," he said. "But we need to find Mark. If he's as dangerous as Isabella claimed, then you and Mia could still be at risk." The mention of Mia jolted Nathan out of his daze. He pushed himself up, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I need to get home," he said urgently. "Mia, she's alone. What if he's there?" "We've already sent officers to your house," Carter assured him. "She's safe, Nathan. But we need your help to figure out what's going on here. Can you give us any more information about Mark?" Nathan took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "She mentioned him before," he said slowly. "I overheard a phone call. She called him by name, Mark, and she said something about an insurance policy, about disappearing after the wedding. It sounded like they'd done this before, like it was part of a plan." Carter frowned, scribbling notes on his pad. That lines up with what we've uncovered so far, he muttered. We've found similar cases, men who were conned into changing their wills and life insurance policies, then ended up dead in supposed accidents. Isabella, or whatever her real name was, played the part perfectly every time. Nathan felt a cold chill settle over him. He had been nothing more than a target, a pawn in their twisted game. He looked at Carter, his voice hollow. Do you think she was telling the truth in the end? That she wanted out? Carter paused, considering the question. It's hard to say, he admitted. She might have had a change of heart, but it could just as easily have been another part of the con. Either way, it doesn't matter now. The important thing is finding Mark before he makes his next move. Home. Again, a moment of relief. When Nathan finally arrived home, he was greeted by the sight of 2 police cars parked outside. Officer Ramirez stood at the front door, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. She gave Nathan a nod as he approached, her expression softening slightly. Mia's inside, she said. She's okay, but she's been worried sick about you. Nathan's heart clenched at the thought of his daughter, alone and scared. He hurried inside, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Mia, he called out, his voice breaking. Daddy! Mia's small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. She bolted down, throwing herself into his arms. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair, taking in the familiar, comforting scent of her shampoo. I'm here, sweetheart, he whispered. I'm here. You're safe. Mia pulled back, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Did you see her? Did you talk to Isabella? Nathan nodded, his expression pained. Yes, I saw her, he said softly. But she's gone now, Mia. It's over. Mia's face crumpled, a mixture of relief and grief washing over her. She had spent so long fearing Isabella, dreading her manipulations and cruelty, but she hadn't wanted it to end like this. Did she say anything? Mia asked quietly. Nathan hesitated. He didn't want to burden Mia with the full weight of what had happened, but he knew he couldn't lie to her either. She said she was sorry, he told her. She said that Mark was the one behind it all, that he forced her to do it. Mia's eyes narrowed, a spark of the fierce determination Nathan had come to recognize. She's lying, she said firmly. She was part of it too. I heard her, Daddy. She knew exactly what she was doing. Nathan's shoulders sagged. He knew Mia was probably right, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Maybe, he said, stroking her hair. But it's over now. We're going to be okay. A new threat. The return of Mark. Just as they began to settle into a fragile sense of normalcy, the phone rang again. This time, Nathan's hand shook as he picked it up, half expecting Mark's voice on the other end. But it wasn't Mark. It was Detective Carter, his voice sharp and urgent. Nathan, we've got a problem, he said. We think Mark is still in town. We've picked up some chatter that he's been seen near your neighborhood. He might be looking for you. Nathan felt his blood run cold. He's coming after us, isn't he? That's what we're afraid of, Carter confirmed. We're sending a unit to keep watch, but I need you to be vigilant. Lock your doors, stay inside, and keep your phone close. If you see anything suspicious, call us immediately. Nathan hung up, his mind racing. He turned to Mia, who was watching him intently, sensing his fear. We need to be careful, sweetheart, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. The police think Mark might be nearby. But we're going to stay safe, okay? We're going to stay together. Mia nodded, her face pale but determined. I won't let him hurt you, Daddy, she whispered. I promise. Nathan pulled her close, holding her as if he could shield her from the world. He wished he could believe that their nightmare was truly over, but he knew better now. Mark was out there, lurking in the shadows, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. The standoff, a night of terror. It was past midnight when the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence of their home. Nathan bolted upright, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed the baseball bat he'd kept by the bed since the threats began and rushed downstairs, Mia close behind him. In the living room, a figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight, streaming through the broken window. It was Mark. He looked just as Mia had described him, the tall, dark-haired man with a scar above his left eyebrow. His eyes were cold, calculating, filled with a dangerous gleam. "Nathan," Mark said, his voice calm, almost amused. "You've caused me a lot of trouble." Nathan tightened his grip on the bat, positioning himself between Mark and Mia. "Get out," he said, his voice low and steady, despite the fear coursing through him. "The police are on their way." Mark chuckled, stepping closer. "Do you really think they'll get here in time?" he taunted. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Maya clutched her father's arm, her eyes locked on Mark's face. "You're not going to get away with this," she said fiercely. "We know what you did. We told the police everything." For a moment, Mark's mask of confidence slipped, revealing a flash of anger. He lunged forward, but Nathan swung the bat, striking him hard across the shoulder. Mark stumbled back with a grunt, his hand going to his side, as if reaching for something. Before he could pull out a weapon, the room was flooded with the blinding light of police flashlights. "Freeze!" Detective Carter shouted, his gun drawn. "Drop whatever you're holding and get on the ground." Mark hesitated, his eyes darting from Nathan to the officers surrounding him. He dropped his hands, letting whatever he'd been reaching for clatter to the floor. "Fine," he muttered, his voice dripping with venom. "You win this time." Nathan collapsed to his knees, the adrenaline draining from his body in an instant. Maya rushed to his side, hugging him tightly as the police moved in to handcuff Mark. "It's over," Carter said, giving Nathan a reassuring nod. "You're safe now." Nathan held Mia close, feeling the weight of everything they'd been through finally begin to lift. He knew they had a long road ahead of them, rebuilding their lives, healing from the trauma. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually be okay. And as he looked down at Mia, his brave, strong little girl, who had fought so hard to protect him, he knew one thing for certain. Together, they could face anything. The police lights faded into the night, leaving the house in a heavy, disorienting silence. Nathan and Mia sat on the couch together, their breaths still coming in short, ragged bursts. The adrenaline of the past few hours had worn off, replaced by an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Nathan couldn't remember the last time he felt this drained, not just physically, but emotionally, as if the very core of his being had been hollowed out. Detective Carter stood by the door, giving orders to the remaining officers. Mark had been taken away, cuffed and snarling, spitting out threats until they shoved him into the back of a police car. It was over. It had to be over. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that some part of this nightmare still lingered, clinging to the corners of his mind, like a dark fog. Carter turned back to them, his expression softer now, more human. He walked over slowly, taking a seat across from them. "Nathan, Mia," he began gently, "I know this has been an incredibly traumatic experience, but I want you both to know you did the right thing. You were brave, and because of that, we were able to catch him before anything worse happened." Mia looked up, her eyes red and puffy from crying, but there was a steely resolve behind her tears. "Is he going to jail?" she asked, her voice small, but filled with a fierceness that surprised even Nathan. Carter nodded. Yes, Mia, he said firmly. Mark is facing a long list of charges: breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud. He won't be seeing the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. Mia let out a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding, sagging back, against Nathan's side. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Thank you, Nathan said, his voice hoarse. He felt like he needed to say more, to express the depth of his gratitude, but the words stuck in his throat. Carter stood, giving them a sympathetic smile. You're welcome. And remember, we'll be here for you. Whatever you need, take care of each other. With that, Carter left, closing the door quietly behind him. The house felt emptier now, like it had been purged of something dark and toxic. Nathan sat there for a long moment, just holding Mia, feeling the weight of everything they had endured, pressing down on him. The first steps to healing. The next morning, the sun rose bright and clear, casting a golden glow through the windows. It was almost unsettling how normal everything looked, how the world kept turning, despite the chaos that had enveloped their lives. Nathan and Mia sat at the kitchen table, eating breakfast in silence. Mia pushed her cereal around with her spoon, not really eating. Nathan sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him in a reality he still struggled to accept. Mia, Nathan began softly, breaking the silence. How are you feeling today? She shrugged, not looking up from her bowl. I don't know, she admitted. I'm glad it's over, but I still feel scared, like he's going to come back. Nathan's heart twisted painfully. He reached across the table, taking her small hand in his. He's not coming back, he promised. The police have him, and they're going to make sure he can't hurt us again. Mia nodded, but her eyes were clouded with doubt. But what about Isabella? She asked. I know she's gone, but sometimes it feels like she's still here, like her ghost is haunting this house. Nathan swallowed hard. He knew exactly what she meant. Every room, every object in the house seemed tainted by Isabella's presence. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway. Her favorite mug sat untouched on the kitchen counter. It was as if her shadow hung over everything, a reminder of the lies she had spun and the love she had shattered. We can change that, he said finally. We can make this house ours again, together. A fresh start. Reclaiming their home. Over the next few weeks, Nathan and Mia set to work. It became their project, their way of reclaiming their space and exorcising the ghosts of the past. They painted the walls, changing the sterile white that Isabella had preferred to warm, inviting colors. They rearranged the furniture, moving pieces that reminded them too much of her into the garage for donation. Nathan even let Mia choose new decorations for the living room, a task she took on with surprising enthusiasm. Mia picked out bright, colorful throw pillows and a new rug with a whimsical floral pattern. She hung up pictures of their trips together, photos of them at the beach, hiking in the mountains, grinning with ice cream cones in hand. The room began to feel lighter, filled with memories that belonged to them alone. One afternoon, as they were sorting through a box of old things, Mia pulled out a small, worn photo album. She flipped through it slowly, her expression softening as she recognized the faces. It was filled with pictures of her mother, laughing, holding Mia as a baby, kissing Nathan on the cheek. Mia traced her fingers over one of the photos, a sad smile on her lips. I miss her, she whispered. Nathan's throat tightened. He moved closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I do too, he said quietly. Every day. They sat there together, looking through the album, letting themselves remember. It was the first time they had really talked about Mia's mother, since everything with Isabella had started. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt. The kind that comes with healing. A new beginning. Rebuilding their trust as the weeks turned into months. Life began to settle into a new normal. Nathan threw himself back into his work, taking on projects that had been neglected during the chaos. He found solace in the structure of his job, the familiar process of designing and creating. But he made sure to leave time for Mia, to be there for her in a way he hadn't been able to before. Mia started a new school year, and although she was nervous at first, she quickly made friends. She joined the school's art club and discovered a love for painting. Nathan would come home to find her at the kitchen table, her hands covered in bright splashes of color as she worked on her latest masterpiece. One evening, Nathan sat down beside her, watching as she put the finishing touches on a landscape painting. It was a picture of a lake, surrounded by tall trees, and a sky painted in shades of pink and orange. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "Is that the lake from our camping trip?" Mia nodded, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah," she said. "I wanted to paint something happy, something that reminded me of when we felt safe." Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You've got a lot of talent, Mia," he told her, "and a lot of courage. I'm so proud of you." A new tradition. Honoring the past, embracing the future. On the 1-year anniversary of the day that changed their lives forever, Nathan and Mia decided to do something special. They packed a picnic and drove out to the state park, where they had camped together. It was a crisp autumn day, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. They found a spot by the lake, setting up a blanket and laying out sandwiches, chips, and Maya's favorite cookies. They spent the day fishing and exploring, laughing and talking like they hadn't in a long time. It felt good, natural. The shadow of the past still lingered, but it no longer held the same power over them. They had faced it together, and they had come out stronger. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the water, Nathan turned to Mia. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've realized something important." Mia looked up at him, curious. "What's that?" Nathan smiled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "I've realized that the most important thing in my life isn't my job or my house or even finding love again. It's you. It's us. We're a team, and that's never going to change." Mia's smile was wide and genuine as she leaned into his side. "I love you, Daddy," she said quietly. "I love you too, Mia," Nathan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." They sat there together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a sense of peace that had been hard-won, but was all the more precious because of it. They had faced darkness, deceit, and danger, but they had come through it together. And as they packed up their things and headed home, hand in hand, they both knew that whatever the future held, they could handle it, because they had each other. This story shows the incredible bond between a parent and child. Have you ever experienced a moment when a loved one saw something you didn't? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.